Hello and welcome to Coronavirus Catch Up. I'm Jordan Kenny and we're live on the BBC News NI website and Facebook page and on the BBC iPlayer for the next 20 minutes or so. So thanks for tuning in however you're joining us. Now, if you shop at Topshop, Debenhams, Dorothy Perkins or Burton, you'll want to listen to this. They've been in the headlines this week as their futures are looking pretty uncertain. We heard today that Debenhams are set to close. There's 5 Debenhams stores in Northern Ireland employing hundreds of people, and the Arcadia Group, so that's the company that owns shops like Topshop, Dorothy Perkins and Burton, has gone into administration. So what does all this mean? Our business reporter Richard Morgan is here live from his house. Hi Richard.
Hi Jordan.
Richard, I heard you on the radio this morning in Dundalk. You've been on the go for quite some time. But firstly, can you talk us through what the situation is at the minute with these shops that we all know from the high street?
Yeah, I was in Dundalk this morning because non-essential retail in the Republic of Ireland has reopened today as the country emerges from lockdown restrictions that they've been under for 5 or 6 weeks. But in terms of what we've been seeing with, let's start with the Arcadia Group, which owns Topshop, Dorothy Perkins, Burton's, Wallace. It entered administration, placing 13,000 UK jobs at risk, and this has also placed hundreds of jobs in Northern Ireland at risk. And basically, it was in trouble before the pandemic. It had struggled to keep up with online competitors and with fashion trends, and lockdown measures across the UK, closures of stores, meant that it just wasn't able to get the sales, to get the money coming in. And what we've seen today is Debenhams entering liquidation. So essentially, Debenhams set to close, as you said, 5 stores in Northern Ireland, hundreds of jobs set to be lost. And the reason that we think Debenhams may, the final nail in the coffin really, is because JD Sports was due to save Debenhams after it entered administration earlier this year. But the collapse of Arcadia is a huge blow to Debenhams because it sells lots of Arcadia's brands in concessions in the store, accounting to about £75 million of sales. So a real issue for the business model of Debenhams, and has probably put off JD Sports, which I have to say shareholders weren't too keen last week anyway on the possibility of them buying or rescuing Debenhams. So a grim day for the high street with more than 25,000 jobs now at risk right across the UK as Arcadia enters administration and Debenhams prepares to close down for good.
So you mentioned there, Richard, that some of these companies were in trouble before the pandemic. So this isn't all down to the pandemic alone, is it?
No, absolutely not. And really, we have a perfect storm at the minute because retail, the high street, was battling a number of issues. We have, of course, the internet, shopper trends. Many of us were switching to online for our shopping because it's so handy. It's also cheaper in some cases, and that pushed a lot of people from the high street to just shopping at home, particularly Debenhams being a department store. I heard one retail analyst say, why visit a department store if you have a department store in your pocket at all times with the likes of Amazon? We also have to consider the fact that physical stores cost a lot of money in rates and rent, and then you have the staffing costs, whereas online does not have that. And when you add the pandemic into the mix and closures of stores in the spring and then again in the autumn, those sales not coming in, really it has been the perfect storm in terms of the challenges for our retail sector. Debenhams has been around for more than 200 years. It's survived recessions, it's survived a depression, it's survived world wars. But the internet and now the pandemic has just basically said, no, that's it. This will be our final Christmas on the high street.
So Debenhams obviously is a department store. What knock-on effect does their closure have for other high street businesses?
Well, it'll have an impact on the businesses or the concessions, the brands that it sells within. So as I mentioned, Arcadia accounts for £75 million worth of sales in terms of the brands like Topshop and Burton and Dorothy Perkins that will be sold in Debenhams. And then you have the makeup counters, and then you have the sort of the perfume, the aftershave that would be on offer in the homeware. So quite a range of brands affected. But then we have to consider the fact that Regardless of the troubles that the high street has faced, Debenhams is still a draw. People will still go out and want to nip to Debenhams, especially at this time of year. And over the last number of years when Debenhams has been known to discount heavily in its Blue Cross sales. So we have the potential impact on footfall, fewer people around because there isn't as much on offer. But then we have to consider, particularly in Northern Ireland, Debenhams is located within 5 shopping centres and will be the key anchor or the key tenant in some of those shopping centres. So there will be real concern there what the closure of Debenhams will mean for those shopping centres, i.e. can the units be replaced? Will they get a large retailer to move in and cover that rental cost? And will they get the people through the doors to keep the shops open and to keep that support, that money coming in?
So other potential knock-on effects there. Moving away from the high street for a minute, the other big story that's been rolling on for the past number of weeks now is about COVID-19 vaccines. Doctors in Northern Ireland are preparing to begin a mass vaccination programme from as soon as the middle of this month. But of course, there's lots of questions about how all of this will work. Our health reporter, Louise Cullen, is here. Hi, Louise.
Hi, Jordan. How are you doing?
Good. In true 2020 broadcasting style, we're in the same building but separated by a floor. Louise, what's the latest we've heard about a timescale for the rollout of the vaccine? Have there been any dates set yet?
Well, for the first time today, health officials went on record and said that they are ready, once a vaccine is approved, to start rolling it out from the 14th of December. That's actually less than 2 weeks away from today, 13 days. And it seems kind of unthinkable when you think back, 9 months ago, a vaccine was the ideal, the dream. And here we are actually talking about one being rolled out. But rolling out a vaccine's a little bit down the road. We've got to get a vaccine approved first. There are 2 in the race that look like one or other of them will be the first, the Pfizer-BioNTech one and the Moderna vaccine. And the UK also looks like it's going to be the first country in the world to give the go-ahead. Now, the Medicines and Health Regulatory Authority, it said that it is taking this very seriously. There will be no safety corners cut. This will be held to an absolutely rigorous standard of care, as all vaccines and medications are, simply because this is urgent and pressing. It's not going to get that much faster a pathway to approval. But both Pfizer and Bio and Moderna are in for approval. In a perfect world, yes, we've got that date of the 14th of December, everything's set up and ready to go. In a perfect world, we'd be rolling out by the end of this month, but that's a perfect world.
So how does this all work, Louise? Could I, for instance, get a vaccine this month?
Are you aged over 80? Are you a healthcare worker? Do you have an underlying condition? First and foremost, for the vaccines, when they're given approval, will be healthcare workers and care home residents. That's because we want to protect the most vulnerable in society and also protect those who are looking after them and looking after all of us, of course. There are an awful lot of factors here. This is a huge operation. Getting a vaccine is just the tip of an enormous iceberg that's made up of logistics and availability and productivity and efficiency. And you've got all those things. You've got to get the vaccine from the laboratory, from where it's being manufactured, to all these locations around the country. Now, what we know today is that for healthcare workers, there's going to be 7 venues around Northern Ireland. Some of those are leisure centres that have been identified as being suitable and accessible safely, maintaining distance and so on for the vaccine to be given, and also on some hospital premises as well. They'll be able to book it online. If you're a healthcare worker, you'll be able to book it online. But first and foremost will be those healthcare workers and then care home residents as well.
Right, let's get to the questions that have been sent in by viewers. We're already chatting about vaccines, so I'll stick with you for this one, Louise. Brian has got in touch and he's asking about vaccine passports. So if you haven't heard that term before, a vaccine passport would be, in theory, something given to those who have been vaccinated, allowing access to places such as pubs and restaurants. Louise, what do we know about them? Is this something that will happen?
Well, we all have a vaccine record. That's part of our medical records. So we have a log of what jabs we've got, what boosters they've had, are we up to date with everything, and so on and so forth. And I don't know if you've been to maybe some countries in the world. I was in Tanzania a few years back, and in order to go to the part of Tanzania that I was going to, I needed to have a yellow fever jab. And I had to have a certificate to prove I'd had that jab. Now, I wasn't asked for that certificate, but I needed to have it in case I was asked for it, or I'd get a pretty hefty fine. So coronavirus vaccine passport will basically be the same thing. Carrying proof that you've had a vaccine is a different matter to simply bearing a certificate to say that you've had. The problem with COVID is that we don't know how long immunity lasts, and we don't know. These vaccines have shown great results in preventing someone from getting sick, but we don't know how well they prevent someone from shedding and spreading the virus, which is another matter, preventing the contagion. So we also don't know how long our immunity will last once we're given that. Will this be a rolling thing? Will we need a booster, and so on and so forth? So talk about a passport, a vaccine passport, is a little bit premature, and the Cabinet Office Minister, Michael Gove, said as much today. He said they're not part of the plan. First and foremost is getting the vaccine. Getting a passport to allow you to go into pubs and restaurants, that's not on the list.
There we go. So there's our answer on vaccine passports for the minute. Richard, we mentioned pubs and restaurants there. We heard from the Chief Medical Officer last week that pubs, bars and restaurants could potentially reopen before Christmas if people stick to the rules currently in place. We've got a number of questions in about places reopening. Are we any further forward with this?
No, not at the minute, and I wouldn't want to try to predict anything, because as we know, this has been one of the most unpredictable years that any of us have known. And a few weeks ago we were supposed to get a decision around the reopening of restaurants and possibly other parts of the hospitality sector, and we all know how that played out, both publicly and around the executive table. A lot of heated exchanges, and the executive ministers themselves said that it didn't reflect well in terms of how everything panned out. You have to remember that at the minute hospitality has been under restrictions now for 7-8 weeks, particularly in the northwest, where there are 2 weeks of restrictions ahead of everywhere else, with places only able to offer takeaway only, and wet pubs closed completely if they don't offer food to take out. The executive is going to have to meet to discuss this, because the current set of restrictions are due to expire just before midnight on the 10th, going into the 11th of December. They'll have to take on board the health advice. If you look to the Republic, where shops reopen today, cafes and restaurants are going to start to be able to welcome people from Friday, but again, they'll have restrictions in place where you have to have spend a certain amount on a meal, or have a substantial meal, and you can only stay in a venue for a certain amount of time. However, wet pubs, that term that we've come to learn this year, they won't be reopening on that date, and you'll have to think our politicians and health officials will probably be looking to the Republic to see what's happening there in terms of that, and they'll be deciding very carefully and weighing up, well, look how long the sector has been closed, what's the impact on jobs and on business, but what will the impact be on health if we do open the sector in the run up to Christmas, when we know everybody is a bit more keen to get out and socialise.
And Louise, just to come kind of to you on that, obviously the Republic of Ireland is starting to open up a bit more. What will ministers here be looking for in a week's time when we do what will happen at the end of this lockdown? And from a health perspective, what will they be looking for?
To see the impact that this additional 2 weeks has had on the numbers, on our case numbers, on our sad death toll, which passed 1,000 today, on the Department of Health's positive test-based measure. Now, I was speaking to the Chief Medical Officer last week, and he says, yes, what we have been through, and including these extra 2 weeks that we are in the middle of, or just about starting now, what they have had is some impact, just not a massive impact, and we are going to need to see a greater impact. Now, we're seeing our hospital inpatients are levelling off and starting to taper as well. We've seen a drop in cases. There are still pockets, But they're going to be looking at all those numbers. They will be looking at what happens across the border, because we've seen in the past, when we had the incredibly high numbers in Derry City and Strabane Council area, at the same time we had incredibly high numbers just across the border in Donegal as well. And we've seen it in South Armagh with Louth and Monaghan having high numbers there as well. So there will be a lot of looking at what happens in the Republic and then thinking about what that effect is, but taking into account our own numbers. And as Richard says, the executive will take the advice from the health experts. It's not obliged to do what the health experts might say they would do. So there's a bit of a dichotomy there.
Well, Richard, obviously Christmas and the New Year period is the busiest time of the year for a lot of businesses. Away from the point of view of someone who's looking to get out to the shops or looking to get to the pub, this lockdown has left a lot of businesses in a difficult position.
Yeah, it absolutely has, and I suppose many were still recovering from the lockdown measures that we had in place in the spring and the early summer. I think from talking to businesses, as I do every day, the number one thing is always clarity. It's just make a decision. Tell us if we're going to close, when we're going to close, for how long it will be, and give us an exit plan or an exit strategy. And once we have that, we can start to plan as best we can. For retailers right now, it's known as the golden quarter. It's when they make a lot of their money that will tide them over through the leaner months early in the winter, January, February. And that is very difficult for them at the minute, because obviously non-essential retail is closed, and they will be looking with a bit of envy, I presume, at our neighbours in the Republic, where non-essential retail reopened today. And we have councillors and the likes of Dundalk telling me this morning, look, the restrictions around travel, it's guidance in Northern Ireland, not to make unnecessary journeys, to stay at home. In the Republic, it's stay within your county. And they're saying cross-border trade really shouldn't be an option this year, that people should not be crossing the border for shopping trips, just because we need to keep on top of the R number. But for hospitality and retail, it is a busy time. They just want clarity. But then when they have that clarity, they're saying the funding packages need to flow. When you announce these restrictions, have something in place, get the money out, get it through our doors, into our bank accounts, whatever, so that we can keep paying our bills. Because remember, they have to cover a small cost of the furlough scheme at the minute, pension and national insurance contributions, and they'll still have other utilities and other bills to pay. And if they have that support in place, they're saying that it may be enough just to get them through to the point where when they can reopen or are allowed to reopen, they will actually be able to open their doors.
Okay, we've got a final question on the vaccines here for Louise, and it's been sent in by David. He asks Louise, what vaccine is going to be rolled out here, and what difference will the type of vaccine make?
Well, as I was saying, there are two in the race to become the first to be approved. The likelihood is it will be the Pfizer-BioNTech, and that is the one that we will get here. That does make a difference, because that will be transported in small batches because of how it needs to be stored. It has to be kept very cold at -70, and that presents further challenges and complications for transporting and dispensing the vaccine around the country. So it's transported in batches of 975 per box because of the dry ice that it has to be packed in, and it can only be taken out of that -70 degree temperature up to 4 times before it must be used. And it can have a very, very short life when it's put into a normal fridge between 2 and 8 degrees. It's got quite a short life. It has quite an effect on the vaccine. We will get 570,000 doses of that vaccine when it is approved and when it is delivered to the UK as a whole. That's enough to vaccinate 285,000 people. That's actually quite a small amount when you look at it. And as I say, that's going to be prioritised for healthcare workers and care home residents. As for the difference getting a vaccine will actually make, that really is the million-dollar question of this pandemic. Getting a vaccine will not be like flipping a switch. It will not be a reset back to January 2020 and everybody's out and about and we're all able to hug the people we love. We're able to sit next to each other to look at photographs on our phone and visit everybody and have parties and all of that sort of thing. It's not a reset button and it's not a return to normality. Initially, not a huge amount of difference will be made, let's be honest. You know, as I said earlier, the vaccine stops the illness. It's not yet clear the effect that it has on the contagion. It's still likely that we'll have to practice quite a bit of social distancing, and that will be the case most likely for months to come as the vaccine starts to roll out through the population. One figure I heard was that possibly by October next year, we may have in and around 70% vaccination in the community, which will contribute to a degree of immunity. So I'm afraid what we're living with, we'll probably be living with in some way, shape or form for quite a few months to come. But with a little bit of luck, as the vaccine starts to roll out and starts to have an effect, a little bit of what was normal before will become semi-normal again.
So brighter days on the horizon, albeit just in the future. Before we go, keeping with the festive spirit, it's the 1st of December. Have you got your Christmas trees up yet? Have you started wrapping your presents?
I'll let Richard go first.
No, the tree isn't up. I always have a rule that it doesn't. The tree doesn't go up until December. So it is December. I had my first advent calendar chocolate this morning before heading to Dundalk, and I'm under a bit of pressure to put the decorations up. So that'll probably be this weekend.
And I have to say, I'm the same. My tree does not go up before early December, so probably it'll go up this week. I also have 2 cats, so I don't want them to use up all their fun before Christmas, trying to destroy the thing. But I did spend the weekend wrapping lots of Christmas presents. I'm one of those saddos who's pretty much organised on the present front at this point, but the decorations have a wee bit to go to catch up.
Well, it sounds like you've got your weekend planned out. You get the tree up this weekend, getting the festive spirit. That's all we've got time for tonight. Thanks to everyone who got in touch. We didn't have enough time to get back to all of you, but hopefully we've helped make sense with the questions that we've answered of some of what's to come over the next few days and what's been happening over the past few days. Thanks again to Richard and Louise for coming on and answering those questions. Don't forget, you can keep up to date with all the latest developments on the BBC News NI website, which you'll find at bbc.co.uk/newsni. That's all from us. Until next week, stay safe.